Any health-related information on the following show provides general information only. Content presented on any show by any host or guest should not be substituted for a doctor's advice. Always consult your physician before beginning any new diet, exercise, or treatment program.
Welcome to Accelerated Health Radio and TV. I'm your host, Sarah Banta. I'm a health coach, natural supplement expert, and a busy mom of 3 teenagers. I believe that your body does want to and is capable of rebuilding and healing itself regardless of what chronic disease you may have. And I'm here for you to answer your questions, bring you innovative and cutting-edge technologies and health solutions to empower you and your ability to reach your optimal state of health. Today, my guest will be talking about optimizing spiritual and mental growth through plant medicine. And I know that you really need a strong physical foundation to work on your mental growth, whether it's overcoming anxiety and depression, losing weight, or detoxing the body in the proper way, and even increasing your level of frequency in life. You need a stronger physical foundation in order to gain the willpower to make the bigger changes in life. If you're new to following me, I specialize in helping you get there. You can find my health articles, my cutting-edge natural supplements, devices, and protocols at acceleratedhealthproducts.com. I dive into an array of health conditions, their causes and symptoms, and how to address them naturally. And I have spent thousands of dollars and hours of my time biohacking different supplements, technologies, and diets that don't work so that you don't have to. If you have any health issues you need help with, you can email me directly through the website. I personally read everyone. Accelerated Health Products is the sponsor of this show. So as you support my website, I'm able to bring you more cutting-edge content and guests to the show. So as I mentioned, today we are going to be diving in on plant medicine and how it can benefit you spiritually and mentally and help you live at that higher state of vibration or frequency as a result. So first I wanted to talk about some frequency enhanced supplements that can aid in the process of healing quicker and more efficiently. Number 1, the Accelerated Keto. This is the only keto supplement that not only kicks you into ketosis within 30 minutes and gets rid of those cravings for sugar and carbs, but it also has additional fat-burning ingredients that help defat your liver. And many of you may be suffering from fatty liver. Keto on its own helps, but with this, you get the results much quicker and you'll feel mental clarity that you haven't felt before. The brain fog lifts. Your energy produced at the cellular level is 10 times more powerful than when you're eating that high-carb diet. And personally, I can go all day fasting with amazing mental focus that allows my body to heal, reduce the pain and inflammation. And for those of you who say they can't eat a high-fat ketosis diet, this is one way to kick your body in ketosis and use intermittent fasting to maintain that state of fat burning. As you feel better physically, you're able to mentally increase your frequency or vibration and become a better version of yourself. Secondly, this one is so important and it is going to be such a great supplement to go along with what we're talking about today. And that's Accelerated Iodine. It is known as the spiritual mineral. It also is the wild card in supporting the immune system. It's getting a lot of press right now as everyone is looking for those natural antiviral agents. It is antibacterial, antiviral, anti-inflammatory, antifungal, antimicrobial, and so much more. It detoxifies the body from heavy metals and radiation. No other iodine does this. It produces mental and physical energy, and it performs that unique function known as healthy apoptosis, which is the natural death of traumatized and unhealthy cells. We don't want them in there. There's no pathogen resistant to iodine, and it was actually used during the 1918 Spanish flu pandemic that killed over 30 million people. And all of that is in addition to its key role for the metabolism and the thyroid. And so as this is improving your spiritual enlightenment, as it's the spiritual supplement and relieves depression and brain fog and helps you connect to your higher self. It also boosts your metabolism, your thyroid, and your immune system. So as I talk about increasing your frequency, meaning living at that higher level of awareness and spirituality, this is getting you there. The scalar frequency embedded in the Accelerated detoxifies that pineal gland, which connects you to your higher self, clears the brain fog, and awakens you. And along with that is the accelerated Nuke No More. And this clears out all non-ionizing and ionizing radiation out of the body. It has those scalar frequencies in there to support that removal of radiation. And we are all exposed to it with our computers, our smartphones, smart devices, smart meters. There's no way around it in this modern world. And this is one way you can protect yourself. Next is the Accelerated Scalar Silver. It has an alkaline pH, unlike any other silver solution, and it is programmed with those bioinformational scalar technology frequencies to further help strengthen the immune system and devitalize those foreign pathogens like viruses. And like the Accelerated, the scalar frequencies embedded in the silver lift you to a higher state of being or a higher frequency. Lastly, I wanted to mention I'm now doing group coaching with my most comprehensive Accelerated Ascent Detox Diet Cleanse. And you can check it out on the website. The results have been over the top from the past couple of groups. The supplements that you take work synergistically and have been chosen very specifically to get you the results much quicker, increase your physical and mental energy, get rid of that brain fog, improve cellular health, and we end with a liver cleanse where you flush out those gallstones out of the body safely. Now to the good stuff. Jonathan, he is the founder and CEO of Behold Retreats and advocates for elevating consciousness and working on ourselves as the most meaningful way to improve the world. As a thought leader in plant medicine, his priority is to guide others to maximize their benefits and raise education and awareness on the subject. Welcome, Jonathan. How are you today?
Hi, Sarah. I'm really well, thank you, and pleasure to be here.
Well, none of you know this, but Jonathan, it's 4 a.m. his time, so give him a little grace as we are asking him to wake up really early. But Jonathan, this is a topic that I know very little about, but it is so timely in 2021 as you heard me talk about in the beginning. I feel like the world is ready to increase their frequency, and they're ready to talk about living at a higher vibration and living at a higher frequency and tapping into the spiritual realm that we haven't done thus far. So I'm super excited to have you on. It's so appropriate. And I'd love to first start with just taking us through your journey. What brought you here, and what was your first journey like?
Yeah, sure. Happy to share. I grew up in Hawaii and was surrounded by a lot of substance abuse and substance use, actually. Hawaii is a magical, beautiful place, but unfortunately it does have a little bit of a dark side as well. And so witnessing that throughout my childhood, I really never felt attracted to substances. And so I completely, removed it. I didn't have any of it in my life. And I didn't think that anything good could come from psychedelics or from plant medicines myself. And then it was when I was about 22 years old, a close friend of mine, she went on a retreat in Peru it was a long retreat, almost a month long, where she started with a very small dosage of ayahuasca and started working towards a higher dosage of ayahuasca. And after that month retreat, she came back completely a different person. And before she was timid and shy and didn't believe in herself and always negative. And she came back totally energized, excited about life. She was organizing picnics in the park and surfing trips and rock climbing. And it was like, wow, what happened to Sophie? And so I remember, I wasn't ready for that at the time, but I remember that taking hold in the back of my mind, in the sense that there's something here that I hadn't recognized or I hadn't expected. And so, subsequently, I actually moved to Asia. I moved to Hong Kong for a consulting job, and was leading a large team there, team of about 120 people in the consulting world. And about after 5 years of doing that, I was actually an atheist at the time, working hard, typical kind of corporate life. And after 5 years doing that, I just remember one day looking myself in the mirror and thinking, is this it? Is this all there is to life? And so I took a year off and traveled through South America. And as part of those travels, I also found myself with some friends at a retreat center outside of Cusco in the Sacred Valley.
Wow. And when you did your first experience, was it, can you take us through it, and where, I guess my question is there's that big leap of trusting in something that is totally out of your control. I'm a type A personality. I love control. And that's, part of my thing is to give people control back on their health. But engaging in plant medicine, there's this aspect where you are out of control of where your mind's going to essentially take you. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, it put a big smile on your face when you began to speak about frequencies, because that's very central to this work and how we work in particular. And secondly, I'm very pleased that you also hinged upon this word control, because it's also very fundamental. And I think the ego, which is the part of the brain that likes to believe that it has control, is certainly the piece that needs to be worked on with plant medicine. And so certainly as we begin to do this work, there is a certain, shall we say, tension between allowing yourself to surrender into the experience itself versus what the ego was liking to do, which is to protect and control at any cost. And so there tends to be a bit of a tension there that plays out and can in fact be quite challenging in terms of those dynamics.
Do you have people that come to your retreats and then say, I just can't do this?
So I'm glad you asked that. For us, we do a lot more before and after the retreats to really help people do high quality preparation. So 3 weeks before a retreat and 3 weeks after a retreat. And that's really been born out of my own experiences in this space. I had my own, winding back 5 years now, I had my own first experience, but a month later I had really gone back to completely to normal. So I had missed out on all of the potential benefits. Even though I had a big, profound experience, it turns out that, it's very common for people to go on these retreats and then, as they return home and they have all the triggers and, they've got these decades of entrenched neural patterns and thinking patterns and limiting beliefs, and all of that stuff comes back. And then, a few weeks later, a month later, you find yourself exactly back to normal. And so that's obviously not what we want. So we take the time and the energy ahead of a retreat to teach people the tools around emotional processing, around metacognition, guided self-inquiry, so they can really understand what some of those limiting thought patterns and limiting beliefs look like, and so they can come to see them more and more on a daily basis. And that really prepares someone to actually go deep into the experience, because they're able to already have those skills in terms of emotional processing and surrender, which makes the experience much more powerful and much more smooth, shall we say.
Well, I know that you've talked about, childhood trauma, and this is something where you can get through that process or cleanse yourself of it. And we all have it, right? I'm raising 3 kids, and I'm sitting here going, what have I done to my children? Am I going to save them from therapy down the road? But of course, we all have these little things. And there's the topic of neuroplasticity. And even in Western medicine, we talk about how to improve that. Can you take us through a little bit of the science of how the plants work in the brain and improve that neuroplasticity neuroplasticity, or how they actually function in the brain to get you in that better spot?
Yeah, sure. So I'll take a few seconds to just describe the state of your average modern Western brain, and then talk a little bit about the science, because I think that setup will be helpful. So there's three things that I like to speak about in terms of things that have and are negatively impacting our brain. So the first is, as you just mentioned, intergenerational trauma and or trauma, right? It's been passed down through the generations, which I didn't used to believe was a real thing, but it 100% is. And then the second is, even the most minor infraction for us when we are still developing can really take hold in our subconscious, because we're just not able to filter between that which takes hold and that which is just, someone having a bad day and saying something not particularly nice. The second dynamic is that our brains are overwhelmed by modern life. So, we've just got so many things competing for our attention, right? We've got all these commitments personally, professionally, socially. We've got, our phones and 1,000 applications on our phones, trying to get our time and our attention. We've got all of these things, and just with all of this kind of overwhelm, what tends to happen is that the brain begins to take shortcuts in its thinking, because it just can't possibly take in all of this stimulation. And while that sounds like a kind of positive adaptive response initially, actually it's kind of short-circuiting the brain. And so what starts as a shortcut, as kind of that energy efficient adaptive response, actually becomes the response. And so the example I sometimes give is, we all know people in our lives that they already have their minds made up about absolutely everything. And so if you give them some new piece of information, you can actually predict what they're going to say about the new piece of information. Now, that's a tragedy. That's a sign of completely lost neuroplasticity. The brain has become deterministic, and you've lost the power of this beautiful organ. So fortunately, that's damage to the software of the brain as opposed to the hardware of the brain. So that can be undone. It requires considerable work. And then the third piece is really around what I would describe as the default mode network. Now, the default mode network is a part of the brain that likes to move into the past, which for a lot of people means kind of depressive thoughts. It also loves to move into the future, which for a lot of people is anxiety inducing. And so it's all of those thoughts that are not, well, it's all thoughts basically are a reflection of the default mode network. And so when we turn off the default mode network, we are here and in this present moment, and we don't have thoughts, which is really amazing and lovely and peaceful. It's the power of now, right? And so these plant medicines, they do quite a number of things. They downregulate the default mode network, which is kind of the seat of the ego. And when we have that kind of muscle flexed for us, it's a very powerful experience, because often it's something that we've never done before, unless we're like, heavy duty meditator. For people to have, the default mode network actually flexed for them is very instructive, because it allows us to feel how to do it for ourselves, number one. And number two, it allows for a massive reconciliation and information exchange between parts of the brain that normally do not communicate. And you can see this on an MRI machine. So if you take your average Western brain and you put it in an MRI machine, what you see is actually a very sad sight. You see that there's a very small number of regions of the brain that are communicating quite a lot with a small number of regions of the brain. So imagine just a few superhighways, right? The I-95 and the 110 and little else. In contrast, if you look at the brain on psilocybin or ayahuasca or any of these other plant medicines, what you can see is that there's a massive degree of interconnectivity between all regions of the brain virtually. And so it looks like, a much more beautiful picture. Now you go, okay, so that's your brain, and that's your brain. Normally that's your brain on drugs. Now what's even more interesting is if you take a Buddhist monk with 30 years meditation practice, no plant medicine, no substances, their brain looks pretty much exactly like a modern Western brain on plant medicine. So all parts of the brain are speaking to all parts of the brain. So you've got coherence, you've got congruence between all parts of the brain. And that's really what we're referring to when we speak about neuroplasticity. We're talking about the full use of the capacity of the brain. And so these plant medicines, they promote neurogenesis, which is the creation of new neurons, as well as the creation of new neuronal connections. So it allows us to quite rapidly regain our neuroplasticity. But obviously, there's a lot more work that's required. You can't just kind of take these plant medicines and get all the benefits. And so it requires also a lot of the mental and emotional work in order to really sustain an elevated consciousness.
Well, one quick question I want to touch on that you probably don't get asked a lot, but in my business, I'm obviously promoting healthy diet and clean eating and supplements that nurture the body. How important is it to someone that comes in with more of the standard American diet background or a cleaner diet and their experience with the plant medicines?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that. So it depends a little bit upon, well, there's two answers that I would give. One is the energetic answer, right? So to what extent are you taking this seriously, right? Because to the extent that you honor this very deep and very spiritual experience is the extent to which the experience will reciprocate to the way that you've honored it. So that's one way that I might answer the question. The second way that I would answer the question is more specific to the individual medicine. So for example, psilocybin, which is the active molecule in magic mushrooms, it doesn't have so much of the requirements from a dietary perspective. But in contrast, ayahuasca, which is, Central and South American brew of chacruna plant and the ayahuasca vine, does have a very strict diet that we need to adhere to. So we need to pretty much cut out meat, salt, sugar, caffeine, alcohol, definitely no prescription medications. You really want to just clean up your diet for the weeks beforehand as much as possible. And, the cleaner that you come into the experience, the easier the experience itself is going to be, both mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually. And so it's really worth investing the time and the energy to prepare oneself.
Can you take us through what the process is once you get there, and like on a daily basis, what is the experience like?
Yeah, so typically our retreats run between 1 week to 2 weeks. And within that duration, there would be somewhere between 4 to 8 ceremonies with plant medicine. Now, if I just take one example of one of our retreats down in Costa Rica, which is really amazing spot to do this work, we would generally do 4 ceremonies over the course of the week. 2 early morning ceremonies with a slightly lower dose in order to get things started and make sure that the medicine is interacting safely with all of our clients, and then 2 higher dose ceremonies later in the week. And so between the ceremonies, generally speaking, there's yoga, there's meditation, there's rainforest walks. The gentleman who leads that retreat, he's an ethnobotanist, he's an author. He's been doing this work for 30 years. He grows all of the ayahuasca on his property. So it's, farm to table ayahuasca experience, which is really lovely. And so it's really immersive experience. There's no road, so you can only get there by boat or, relatively short walk down the beach, which is amazing because it just means there's no cars passing and you can really immerse yourself in nature and rediscover your own nature as you go through that experience. So each of our retreat centers are a little bit different, but hopefully that paints a little bit of a picture in terms of what takes place over the course of a week. And sorry, I should have shared also, there's also integration work. So after each of the ceremonies, we do group and or individual talks to, just for people to be able to share their experiences, their insights, their lessons. And people find that often very helpful just to express what it is that they've gone through, but then also to hear the lessons learned from others, because often people people around you are also having profound breakthroughs, and so you can almost kind of integrate their experiences a little bit, which is also nice, because if someone's had the experience of universal love, for example, then there's a lot that we can all learn from those sorts of experiences.
Amazing. And how many people in a group typically?
Yeah, so we tend to run smaller groups, so no more than 10, typically speaking. And that's for people who are in a financial position to do so. I would always recommend that they consider doing this work privately. The overwhelming majority of people tend to start doing this work in a group setting, and then if finances permit it, they often move more into a private setting, because it's just so much deeper when you don't have to think or worry about anything else around you, and you can just have entirely your own experience without anything else going on. But generally speaking, people, there's a sort of safety in numbers that people like, and just to network and become familiar with the territory. So people tend to start with a group setting and then move into private work if they feel called.
Wow, this is fascinating. And we're going to take a short commercial break and come right back with Jonathan DePotter and talk more about plant medicine. Welcome back to Accelerated Health Radio and TV. I'm your host, Sarah Banta, the owner of Accelerated Health Products. And today we're talking about plant medicine with Jonathan DePotter. It's fascinating, as I am always wanting to increase my frequency spiritually, mentally, and physically. Jonathan, you are in my future. I actually was talking to my husband about it last night. I'm like, this is something that we will be doing at some point. Don't know when, but we will. Jonathan, what are the motives of most of the clients that you get?
Yeah, that's been an interesting journey, because our motivation has really been to work with high impact people and people who are already operating at a high level and taking them to an even higher level. Now, I thought that would be a message that would really resonate with the market, and that there would be a lot of people that attracted. But it turns out that actually people need more of a trigger in order to explore this work, which is very interesting. So I'll share with you a couple of the different, typical motivations of our clients, and then you can steer the conversation as you see fit. So broadly speaking, people come either for, number one, healing, right? So they're trying to get rid of that past trauma or negativity, or even sometimes, physical healing as well. Number two, for creativity and growth, right? So they already feel like they're doing pretty good, but they'd like to go further. And then number three, and sorry, in relation to that, also a common one is finding passion for, finding their true calling. There's a lot of people out there who have been very successful in the corporate world or in doing what they do, but are not quite sure whether they're quite on purpose. And so, a little bit of divine guidance might be in order. And then the third is really around deepening that spiritual connection. And so, for me, for example, I didn't even believe that the spiritual realm existed up until my first experience. And so that really opened that door in full. And so there's a lot of people that are really, whether they want to call it source or God or spirituality in general, they're just trying to deepen their connection there.
Do you find that anyone in any sort of religion finds that this is against their religion, or is it to further their or enhance their bond or their devotion to God, or whatever their God is?
Yeah. So the first thing that I would say is that through this work, my experience has been that religions at large make sense, right? There is, the wisdom, the messages that come from the broad variety of religions do make a great deal of sense when you're looking at them through the lens of, your own spiritual experiences. So, what I would say is that if someone is a very devout Christian, let's say, that they might consider how they have their experience a little bit more carefully than most. Because if you go down to the Amazon jungle with some Peruvian shaman and participate in a 1-week ayahuasca retreat, well, shamanism is a completely different cosmology than Christianity, right? And so to some extent, those experiences are going to challenge the cosmology of a devout Christian. There's going to be a sort of tension there and dynamic that plays out, which can be very challenging. And in fact, I would say that my own first experience with ayahuasca, which was in a shamanic context, that was, not a large part, but a significant part of the challenge itself was coming to terms with this different cosmological energy that was part of the ceremony itself. So for a devout Christian, say, that was keen to experience ayahuasca, we would probably recommend a context for that outside of a shamanic sort of experience. So there's actually, Santo Daime is a Christian ayahuasca church, right? So it's not that necessarily that ayahuasca is at odds with Christianity. That's not the case at all. And in fact, I think these experiences are, they are in sync with virtually all religions. It's just that you want to choose the context for the experience a little bit differently than if you were just, like me, an atheist with an open mind to whatever might happen.
It's funny that you say that, because I am a Christian. However, I also follow a lot of astrology and some other beliefs, and I am just shocked and just pleasantly surprised at how intertwined they are, how the same story is told in different ways. And really, we are all one. And that's something that you've talked about before. And it gets rid of the ego, and it's just fascinating. Let's talk about that a little bit. The belief of getting rid of the ego, and that in the universe, we are all one.
Yeah. So the way that I'd probably frame this is that as we start doing this work, we generally have quite a bit of healing to do for ourselves. And then we're more into the growth type of experience, and then more into the transcendent types of experiences. And what's interesting about these transcendent experiences is that they are agnostic to any religion, right? So we have the same spiritual, mystical experiences, whether you're from the Amazon basin in Brazil, or whether you're from the desert in the Middle East, or whether you're from North America as a Christian. So these mystical experiences are universal, regardless of whether you were in a sweat lodge for 3 days, or in a dark retreat for a month, or taking ayahuasca, the way that or even some people having these experiences without any sort of, stimulation from the outside. So that's very exciting. It just shows us that there's a foundation there, a common foundation for these experiences. Now, the experiences themselves are, they're incredible. There's 1,001 people who've tried to reduce these types of experiences to natural language, and they never do a good job, and I won't either. But the ones that are very common is to have the experience of universal love, right? So that's universal love that transcends all logic, all rationality, all ego, and the ego just completely dissolves into this mystical experience where you just feel, wow, the love sits above anything that's in the material world. And that's just such a such a comforting experience in of itself to have that experience. And it's common for people that have this experience to describe it as more real than life itself. So it's not like, oh, my brain was just off having experience. It's this very profound and deep experience that you certainly bring back. And then as you kind of move through the various states of consciousness, we have the capacity for even more and more and more profound mystical experiences of this type, right? So interconnectivity of all things is a common mystical experience. As you shared, Sarah, we are all one is a very common and powerful experience. So you can kind of feel that, yeah, we're all a reflection of the same collective consciousness having an individual conscious experience. And to try to reduce this to natural language is challenging. But when the whole universe flips upon itself and you can see that it's all just a reflection of yourself and that it's a reflection of the other, is like, wow, okay, well, I'm never going to flip off someone in traffic ever again, because that's just a reflection of my own consciousness, the collective consciousness. And so, there's other experiences like the profundity of life, and just experiencing life as it is, or, the one that comes often following that is creation, which is, life is kind of life on earth. And then there's creation as a much larger experience, and how all of those pieces kind of come together. And so, yeah, there are experiences that as we elevate our consciousness are super profound. The challenge, the opportunity is to actually sustain those higher levels of consciousness so that we're operating from those places on a daily basis rather than just having, quote unquote, psychedelic experiences.
Well, I find that, in the last year and a half, just with COVID and everything that's going on, there's this big divide in people that are really focused on living at a higher level of frequency. And then those that are so trapped in the fear and they're living at a lower frequency, lower vibration, but they don't know how to get out. And I feel like there's this big divide. How do you, I don't know what my question is, but I guess if we're all one, and this is a big question, if we're all one, how are we dealing with that part of the universe and those people that are stuck in such fear and can't get out of their own way?
Yeah. So, and it is a big question. I'm glad that you asked it. So I think, the best thing that any of us can do is of course to focus on ourselves and to elevate our own consciousness, and as a result of that, hopefully positively impact those people around us, right? Each of us has our own evolutionary path to walk, and so to a great extent we can't force anyone to do their own work. We can only do our own work and encourage those around us to also potentially walk their own path and find ways to accelerate their own path, whether that's through your products, through plant medicine, through understanding metacognition, doing their own spiritual practices, etc. So, and I think there's incredible potential in that, right? Because if you and I impact, let's just say 10 people, right? That's a huge number. If we're encouraged 10 people to elevate their consciousness, that's enormous. And those 10 people encourage 10 more, we're on to a good thing. And I think we really are at that juncture at the moment. I think you're right to say that there are a lot of people that are stuck in the patterns of fear. And so I think we're at a pretty defining juncture for ourselves collectively. And it's going to be, I think, a very challenging time for a lot of people. But the best thing that we can do is just to continue to do our work and support and guide others to do theirs.
So let's go back to the actual experience someone would have at your retreat. If they're overcoming some childhood trauma or whatever their experience is, will they have memory of the whole experience when they're under the influence of the plant medicine?
Sometimes yes, sometimes no. So it depends upon the depth of the experience. And, these medicines, let's take ayahuasca, for example. Ayahuasca has 463 compounds in it. So it's a very complex medicine. And of course, we human beings tend to be pretty complex as well. So even if you take a known ayahuasca brew, someone who's been doing ayahuasca for 2 decades, and they've been doing it every night for, let's just say, the last 3 nights. And on the fourth night, if you ask them, well, what's going to happen tonight? They're going to look at you and they're going to say, I don't know. Because this is such complex work. It's so energetic. It's so deeply spiritual that unfortunately we can never know. And so, sharing my own experience, there was my own first retreat experience. There were certainly parts where I had very vivid and humbling lessons, right, where I was shown the face of my mother and all the positive emotions that she, the stronger positive emotions, pride and joy, and how I had caused those emotions over the course of my life in her. And then equally, I was shown all of the worst, right? Shame and guilt and all of those, those really sad, those emotions. And yes, of course, as a third party, I was shown how I had caused those emotions in my mother. And to see that as a third party, you interacting with your mother while you're watching from afar is just an incredible experience. I mean, it's just like, okay, so I want to be a lot more of that, and I don't want to be any more of that, in a way that, yeah, I mean, we understand these things on paper, right? It makes sense. Of course, we know that. We instinctively and mentally, we know that. But to have that experience in such a profound and clear way just allows for such a shift to take place, which is pretty humbling.
My question would be, is after you've seen that, and then you face your mom in real life, does it evoke those feelings of guilt, or those feelings, or is it seen kind of as a non-event and you're able to handle it without emotion?
Yeah, so it's very common for people to relive experiences from earlier in life, and even past repressed negative experiences, right? Where maybe your mother yelled at you, or did something even worse than that, maybe gave you a smack that has had a developmental impact upon you. And so what's very important is when people have these experiences, that they first integrate, and that's why we provide the coaching and the therapeutic wrapper, is that they first integrate whatever experience that they've had back into their own character and back into their own being, so that as and when they're expressing, either some disappointment or, whatever other emotions might be coming up, guilt, shame, back to their mother or their father or whomever else in the family or friends group, that they're coming from a whole place. They're coming from a place of acceptance and having kind of fully integrated that experience, versus like, hey, you did this when I was 5 years old, and it's really messed me up for the rest of my life. And it's like, no, that's just perpetuating this cycle of victim, perpetrator, savior that we've got just on the hamster wheel in this world. And so generally speaking, we spend quite a bit of time with our clients to understand their experience, how they're integrating it, what their instincts are in terms of how they're integrating that experience back out into the broader collective, and then just provide some guidance for them so that they can find the right path for themselves. So there is no kind of hard and fast answer. For me personally, I shared the full experience of what I went through with my parents, and that was a really amazing and healing in of itself, because I was just I recognized all of the amazing things that they've done for me. We're massively different in terms of my parents and I, but there's great beauty in that, and it just really took our relationship to a whole nother depth of understanding and appreciation and love and all of those sorts of good things. So yeah, for me personally, it was a really beautiful experience and sharing experience.
Well, you've told us all about the benefits, and I'm sold. However, I have to ask, are there any risks? I mean, what risks should someone be aware of going into this?
Yeah, there's 3 types of contraindications. So the first is psychological. So if anyone has a history of psychosis or schizophrenia, or bipolar, then generally speaking, this is a no-go for them. Now, that being said, some of the biggest and most impressive breakthroughs are with working with bipolar people, but it needs to be done with one of the utmost experts. So, for anyone who's listening, if that's of interest, do a lot of research, find a real expert in this space, because that work is no joke. You are trying to remove something energetically and spiritually from the body, and that's very complex work. The second group is physical contraindications. So we do a very in-depth medical screening for all of our clients, both for the psychological side as well as for the medical side, and so we have a clinician review that. But generally speaking, heart conditions and stroke means it's a no-go. There are some exceptions to that, but those are the two primary contraindications. And then third to that, there are others, but I won't go into it here. And then third to that is prescription medication. So ayahuasca in particular really doesn't play nice with anything that's pharma grade medicine, and so you really have to come off of any SSRIs or generally speaking other prescription medications. But again, we review that as part of the medical intake to make sure that it's going to be safe for our clients.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned bipolar, because in my mind, I would think that would be one category of people that would really benefit from this. People with addictions, people with mental illness, and bipolar fits right into there. But I guess, as you say, it just needs to be watched and supervised at a much higher level. Jonathan, I am so excited to have had you on, and you have just opened my world, and I hope everyone else's world, as truly this, I believe, is the year that everyone focuses on increasing their frequency through diet, supplements, physical activity, and plant medicine possibly. And this is something that is on my bucket list. So hopefully I'll be able to see you soon. And before we go, why don't you tell people where they can find you and a couple of the locations of the retreats, because they're all over the world.
Yeah, sure. So you can find us on www.behold-retreats.com, or just Google for us, Behold Retreats. And we've got retreats, beautiful retreats in Costa Rica and Mexico, in Netherlands and Peru. And shortly here, we're also going to be opening up in Portugal and Jamaica. So if what we've been talking about sounds of interest to you, just let us know. There's about, this is, I always say to our clients, and I'll share with you as well, Sarah, this is a rabbit hole that has so many layers to it. And it just goes and goes and goes. The more I learn, the more I recognize that I really don't know, which is what's so exciting about this work.
Well, you and me both. And that's why I do what I do, because my interest in knowing more and more and more comes out of how much I learn is how much I realize I don't know. And that's why I love doing these podcasts and interviewing people like you, and just going on this journey wherever life is meant to take me. So thank you for joining us, Jonathan. I really am excited to have had you on, and so glad to have met you. And thank you, everybody else, for joining us today. If I can help you with your health issues, you can contact me directly at sarah@acceleratedhealthproducts.com. I'm happy to put together a protocol for you. I know it's sometimes hard to know where to start. And as I mentioned before, I'm now doing the group coaching with the Ascent Diet Cleanse. It has been fantastically successful with everybody. The proper synergistic supplements, working with the group coaching and the education, people are coming out the other end just saying their life has been changed. It's not just a quick, short-term diet. So if you're interested, DM me or email me directly through the website. You can find this episode and all my episodes on YouTube and iHeartRadio, iTunes, Stitcher, Pandora, whatever podcast platform you subscribe to. Join us every week at 8 a.m. Pacific time. And now you can also use coupon W4HC20 for 20% off site-wide. Thanks again for joining us here on Accelerated Health Radio. Have a great week.